takes its time, where stone softens under patience alone, and where the earth writes slow sentences in the dark. If that sounds soothing, you can softly tap like and subscribe. And if you want a continuous stream of calm learning while you drift, you can set the playlist in the description to carry you onward. How sleepy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Imagine yourself walking along a meadow that looks simple on the surface. Grass sways with a breeze that barely moves your sleeve. A fence line wanders toward a cluster of trees, and the air carries that clean, cool scent you notice after rain. You feel the ground through your shoes, steady and quiet. It tells a story you do not hear with your ears, but with your sense of time. Beneath your steps, a different river flows, not with rushing noise, but with tiny movements in a labyrinth of stone. You pause, and you find yourself easing into that idea, letting your attention nestle under the soil, under the roots, into the bedrock where small fissures widen over centuries, where drops of water count time perfectly. Cast begins with stone that trusted water to be gentle, and in that gentleness to be strong. Limestone, formed in ancient seas, holds the memory of shells and the whisper of reefs, settled grain by grain, pressed into dense layers. Dolomite, similar yet slightly different, sits nearby. Gypsum is there in other places, lighter, more willing to dissolve, and salt is even more delicate. The landscape that grows from these materials is not carved with a hammer, but with breath. Rain falls through air rich with the quiet exhale of forests and soil, picks up carbon dioxide, and becomes a mild carbonic acid. Not harsh, not fierce, simply persistent. When it reaches limestone, it negotiates a delicate exchange at the surface of grains and along tiny cracks. Calcium carbonate dissolves into the water, and the stone surrenders a little, making room. Imagine the roof of the world as a sponge of rock, not full of large gaping voids at first, but stitched with joints and bedding planes, thin sheets and lines where the weight of the earth and the history of its folding left small weaknesses. Water finds those lines. It seeps through the topsoil and into the zone geologists call the epicast, a weathered skin just beneath the surface. Here, storage is subtle. There are pockets and pathways, places where water perches after a rain, releasing its contents slowly, like a person pouring tea with care. Over time, this epicast drip prepares the land below for larger channels. It selects routes through the stone, exploring options the way your eyes might trace the grain of wood on a tabletop. There is no rush. The gentle rhythm continues. You find yourself descending now, in your mind, into a cave that has not yet opened wide enough for feet. It begins as threads of water meeting, following gravity. Each droplet takes a little of the rock with it, and over seasons the threads merge, becoming thin tubes, then small conduits. Some pathways carry water only after storms, then dry to a polish that looks almost pure. Others hold water all the time, and the gentle ovals, smoothed by flow in all directions, without a floor or a ceiling in the sense your eyes expect. You drift through these spaces with your attention loose, letting the shapes guide you, as if tracing the inside of a seashell. This is the slow work of dissolution and transport, a steady taking apart and carrying away, balanced later by deposition. The chemistry remains mild and patient. In air-filled rooms, water that once held dissolved limestone under pressure comes up, meets a space where the air is calm, and carbon dioxide can leave solution. As it does, calcium carbonate no longer feels at home in the water, and it settles out, little by little, as films that thicken into flowstone, as razor-thin rings that become saucers, as hollow soda straws that lengthen one drop at a time. The ceiling develops points, and from those points the cave grows tiny porcelain tubes. A drop forms at the end, weighs itself down, releases, and lands with the softest sound on the cave floor. Each drop leaves a breath of calcite behind. Stalactites and stalagmites grow toward each other like slow-moving neighbors. When they meet, the room receives a column, a support given by water and time rather than by human hands. In some corners, you find rimstone pools, terraces like rice paddies, where water wavers and deposits tiny dams. The surface tension holds a soft stillness that looks like it could be wiped away, and yet it endures, in some places older than towns on the hills above. Settle into the idea that everything here responds to subtle changes. A storm on the surface changes the sound of a cave more than the sight. It brings a low hum, a bit more water along the walls, little murmurs through the constrictions. In the dry season, a cave becomes a sanctuary of constancy. The air is cool, the temperature steady, often close to the average of the local climate. The stone smells faintly of mineral and moss. Your breath mingles with the breath of the mountain, and you notice the cadence of drops more than anything else, a gentle metronome for sleep. The gentle rhythm continues. When people first named karst, they were looking at a corner of the world where this kind of landscape speaks plainly. In the region known as Kras or Karso, in what is now Slovenia and Italy, the ground carries shallow soils, low shrubs, and stark openings where streams disappear. The term travelled, gaining a broader meaning, applied wherever rocks readily dissolve under these soft, chemical rains and wayward streams. The Dinaric Alps hold miles of it, deeply incised and laced with caves. In Kentucky and neighbouring regions, limestone layers hold the vast passages of Mammoth Cave, a labyrinth where streams have negotiated their paths for millions of years. In southern China, you can picture the famous Tower Karst near Guilin, steep hills rising like islands from flat plains, remnants left as the surrounding stone melted away with quiet insistence. In the bays of Vietnam, similar towers step out into water, softened reflections of the towers on land. In the Yucatan, there is another face to karst. There, the land hugs the sea, flat and full of hidden voids, where the roof sometimes thins and opens into cenotes, clear pools that reveal the groundwater below. In surface toward a shallow depression. Some sinks in at once, following invisible cracks. In karst, surface streams often shorten their journeys. They may begin as clear brooks, then vanish into swallow holes called ponas, the water slipping through a mouth in the ground. The valley they leave behind can end abruptly, a blind valley if the stream has found a way underground. The depressions are sometimes circular and gentle, sometimes elongated fields with fertile soil, called poljes, where seasonal flooding creates temporary lakes with glassy surfaces. You imagine local people waiting for the water to lower, planting crops when the season allows, living with the rhythm of rising and falling levels as part of the year's quiet choreography. As the water finds its path under the surface, it collects into underground streams that wound through the bedrock, joining, splitting, and rejoining. They flow through conduits that expand with use, in a feedback that remains gentle but effective. The faster the flow, the more likely it is to bring undersaturated water into contact with dissolvable walls, and the more it can carry away. But even here, the tone is slow. Conduits expand at rates measured in millimeters per year in many cases, and even less in some. The difference emerges over centuries, then turns into rooms people can enter after tens of thousands of years, then into networks that stretch for hundreds of kilometers after many millions. Sometimes these networks reveal themselves at the surface in modest ways. A spring appears at the base of a hill, clear and cold, as if the earth learned to breathe water. Springs that draw from karst aquifers can be surprisingly steady for months, then surge gently after wet periods, their pools developing a mild hum. In some regions, there are Vauclusian springs, where water rises from deep conduits through a chimney-like opening, forming a steady glass-green pool with a hint of secrecy. On coasts, in places like the Adriatic shore, there are springs called vruljas that emerge under the sea, a faintly shimmering lens of fresh water within salt, a mingling that continues day and night. Far offshore in other places, blue holes and anchuline caves reveal a layered world below, where fresh and salt meet in subtle gradients, where small shrimp drift in cool twilight, and where stone records ancient sea levels on its walls as tidy horizontal lines, as if the ocean kept a journal. The shape of a cave tells the story of its waters. If you run your hand along a wall in your mind, you can feel small scallops, ripples in rock carved not by wind, but by eddies in water. Their size speaks to how fast the flow was at the time they formed. Large, shallow scallops suggest slower flow, while smaller ones hint at greater speed. You could stand with a light and see a keyhole profile, telling you that the conduit began in a saturated zone and later dried enough for falling water to carve a trench. You might notice cupolas on ceilings in some areas, roundish bells carved by rising warm waters in hypogene caves, caves born not from surface rain seeping down, but from waters rising with different chemistry from below, sometimes enriched with hydrogen sulfide. Where that gas met oxygen in cave air, sulfuric acid formed gently yet effectively, dissolving limestone and leaving behind gypsum in pale crust. chemistry is a comforting companion here, reliable and unhurried. When carbon dioxide dissolves into rainwater, it forms carbonic acid in a whisper of a reaction. This makes the water just acidic enough to coax calcium carbonate into solution. The process is balanced by conditions. In soil, where carbon dioxide levels are higher due to the respiration of roots and microbes, the water becomes a bit more capable. When it moves into rock and the carbon dioxide later leaves solution in cave air, the balance shifts and the dissolved minerals appear again as crystals. Cave formations record these balances like delicate graphs drawn in stone. Layers of calcite can hold tiny clues to past climates, a message written in the ratios of isotopes and in the trace elements that tag along. Speleothems grow by thin films, sometimes smooth and clean, sometimes changed by minute variations in temperature, moisture, and even by microbial communities that guide the crystal shapes. You can imagine a scientist studying a thin section under gentle light, not hurried, listening to the story the stone wants to say about the last storm, the last century, the last ice age. There are places where the story of karst is not only about dissolving and emptying, but also about filling and building outside caves. Along clear streams, especially where springs are rich in dissolved calcium bicarbonate, you see travertine and tufa forming terraces. The water bubbles releases carbon dioxide to the air, and as it does, calcium carbonate precipitates onto sticks, moss, and rocks. Over time, this builds natural dams, creating stepped pools that catch the sun and trap floating leaves in slow loops. In places like Plitvice lakes, the process is visible in the daylight, with water thickening into white curtains where it flows over tufa rims. Even this visible briskness is simply another facet of patience, a steady construction measured in layers so thin they often vanish against the eye's limits, but accumulate into walls that guide entire streams along softened paths. Not all karst is limestone. In some regions, gypsum dissolves much faster, and the land responds quicker after changes in climate or water use. In other places, salt layers buried under sediments can form cavities that move and change over months and years, listening more closely to the weight above and the presence of water. These landscapes are quick in the language of geology, but the tone remains measured. Even when a depression appears at the surface, it is not a shout. It is the land adjusting. You allow the thought gently and let it pass, aware that engineers and geologists spend careful time mapping and understanding these settings, because the subsurface is a network, a quiet city of threads, and it needs respect. Karst aquifers care for water in their own way. They are not like sponges with uniform pores. They are like city maps made of alleys and broad avenues, yards and courtyards. Some routes are fast. Water arriving from a sink point can travel in hours or days to a spring, traced by harmless dye that appears downstream like a note placed in a bottle upriver. stretches over weeks and months. This means karst aquifers can be abundant and generous, offering cities and farms a steady supply, but they also ask for care. Because water can move quickly, anything carried by it can reach springs in short time. The response is calm stewardship, a lesson that repeats quietly through the years. Protection zones around sink points and springs, mindful land use, and simple respect for the paths underfoot become a routine that feels like tending a garden you cannot see. There is life down here, even in the dark. Troglobites, animals that spend their entire lives away from the sun, evolve in ways that feel poetic. Fish that once needed eyes now drift without them, guided by a sense of touch and by gentle pressure waves, their scales milky and smooth, their movements unhurried. Salamanders in some caves remain pale and slender, living slowly. Invertebrates like isopods and beetles adapt their bodies to the cool, stable conditions. Microbial films soften rock with their presence, encouraging dissolution in some places, guiding mineral growth in others. Even in total darkness, energy moves, not from daylight, but from chemical gradients, from the slow oxidation of reduced compounds brought in with waters rising from below. Anchialina caves hold tiny shrimp that carry a pink glow in lamplight like petals afloat. Bats rest in the upper rooms, near entrances, where darkness and an occasional trace of warm air meet, their presence noted by the soft sound of air over membrane, the gentlest of murmurs. All of this life fits the clock the cave keeps, a clock that shuns urgency and favors repetition without haste. As you unfocus a little, imagine how layers of rock remember oceans. In limestone, fossils sit like notes in a score, some as delicate as lace, others as sturdy as coins. These pieces of ancient reefs and shells make the stone a fabric of calcium carbonate, ready to trade with water. The shapes of the fossils guide flow on the tiniest scales, and over long periods these small preferences add up. In places where chert nodules interrupt the limestone, the water weaves between softer and harder parts, making rooms with ribs and knobs. In dense, crystalline marbles, carved by waters in similar chemistry, the sparkle under light reveals a different memory, a metamorphosed origin. Even within a single cave, the personality of the stone can shift from room to room, and the water learns each character slowly. Imagine the weight of winter above a karst plateau. Snow falls, resting in quiet layers. When spring arrives, meltwater slips down, clear and cold, gentle and effective. It breathes in soil air and arrives ready to dissolve. Springs thicken and clarify. Underground rivers rise towards ceilings they cannot touch, and in some passages the force is enough to lift silt left from earlier times, only to settle it again when the pulse passes. The cave smells different then, almost like rain, but deeper. In summer, the system draws on stored water, releasing it slowly, and the sound softens again, a resumed lullaby, year after year. This cycle breathes through the body of the mountain. The gentle rhythm continues. set of seasonal notes. The world's cast is a library of dialects with the same grammar. Caves remember history in other ways. If sea level rises and falls through ice ages, entrances near coasts drown and re-emerge, leaving lines of corrosion and mineral tide marks on the walls. In some coastal caves, ancient wood fragments are preserved in still water, dark and quiet. If a river outside shifts its course, a through cave that once carried brisk flow becomes a dry gallery kid for quiet animals and curious people. Sediments on cave floors register distant events, like dust from deserts carried by wind in little plumes, settling layer after layer. Researchers can take small, careful cores and read them like calm books, reconstructing climates and landscapes beyond the cave's mouth. In this way, a hidden place can tell the story of open skies. The physics of flow under the ground might feel technical during the day, but at night it becomes a soothing sequence of images. Picture a conduit narrowing so that water speeds up, then widening, so it slows and deposits the silt it carried. Think about how a sharp bend can create eddies that linger just beyond the turn, cleaning some surfaces more than others, leaving gentle scallops. Imagine a passage filled to the ceiling during high water, then draining, leaving a thin film that slides down as droplets. Repeat that cycle over thousands of seasons. The shapes become inevitable, like a hand that always arranges small items in a certain order on a bedside table. Over time, tiny variations in hardness twist into curves that feel natural to your eye. The water does not force, it suggests. The stone does not resist, it attends. The result is a landscape of agreement between patient partners. Some caves lie in deserts, where rare storms move through with a dignity that does not last long. In those caves, rooms hold air that remembers a cooler time, and formations bear dusty hues. Elsewhere in cold regions, ice becomes a seasonal guest. It can form speleothems of its own, like translucent stalactites that fade as days grow longer. Near entrances, winter air sinks in and shapes delicate hoarfrost patterns, while deeper in, the cave remains separated from the swing of seasons, holding steady like a steady breathing pattern at rest. You walk mentally through these transitions with quiet steps, attentive but relaxed. People have always been drawn to these places for reasons that are easy to understand. A cave offers shelter from the elements, a stable climate, a sense of seclusion. Painters left their marks near entrances where light could gather, and those images, even when they carry the energy of hunts and animals, soften when seen through the lens of time. Further in, the quiet becomes complete, and sound is a smaller world of drips and soft echoes. Monks and hermits have sought the stillness of cavities in cliffs, and travelers have used springs as reliable stops. In many cultures, sinkholes and cenotes were more than water sources. They were portals to other layers of meaning, places where offerings found a home, where the surface world acknowledged the one below. You can envision a person standing at the edge of clear, still water, breathing slowly, feeling the air cooler near the ground, aware of the connection between engineers plan foundations with this in mind, mapping cavities and reinforcing where needed. Farmers understand where water vanishes and where it returns, planting according to the season's breath. Park rangers lead visitors into show caves, lights low and focused, voices soft, asking for patience and respect on the walkway. In some places, divers explore underwater passages where the environment demands a careful meditative rhythm, buoyancy tuned to a whisper, hands tied behind backs to avoid stirring fine sediments. It is a world that rewards steady attention. Hypogene caves tell an alternative story from beneath. Imagine an aquifer deep in rock, warmed a little by the earth and enriched with gases from deeper layers. Hydrogen sulfide arrives in the mix and meets oxygen near an opening. Its slow oxidation produces sulfuric acid that gently dissolves limestone from below, sometimes replacing it with gypsum. Over time, ceiling cupolas form like weathered domes, and pendants hang in clusters where water rises through narrow points. These caves feel different, their shapes smoothed by rising waters, rather than by streams descending from the surface. Some rooms hold fallen blocks, sculpted by dissolution, rather than by river scour. In places, gypsum crystals form velvety coatings called moon milk, soft enough to smear with a fingertip, appealing and fragile. You picture a scientist's notebook filled with quiet sketches of these textures, pencil lines light enough to respect the softness of the subject. In other caves, speleothems reach into the realm of the unusual. Helictites grow like tiny wandering twigs of stone, defying gravity's simple pull by following capillary movement, slight changes in airflow, and microscopic gradients. Cave pearls form in pools, where small grains roll under dripping water, gathering layers until they become smooth spheres, resting in basins like a handful of cool marbles under a spring-light beam. Draperies bend and fold along ceilings and walls when water runs along an edge, leaving ripples that look like curtains caught in a forever breeze. There is even the rare miner's delight of aragonite needles, slender and crisp, gathering where conditions favor their crystal form. Each feature is a chapter in the book of patience, written without hurry. You may picture a landscape where most streams appear briefly, then disappear into small holes at the base of a cliff. Downstream valleys are quiet, with few surface streams recrossing them. The relief of the land shows the work of underground rivers more than the rivers you can see. This arrangement introduces delicate balances for plants and animals above, who depend on soil moisture and on springs rather than on flowing water in open channels. The result is a mosaic, some areas dry, others permanently damp, and those damp spots hold mosses and ferns even in late summer. On certain mornings, mist collects in dolines, the round depressions scattered like shallow bowls, and it lingers late as the sun climbs, an effect from the cool air pooling gently. You can stand at the rim and watch the boundary between mist and clear air form a soft line that slowly lowers, as if drawn by a careful hand. Human curiosity has mapped many caves, but most of the underground remains a quiet question mark in the global map, without question. Explorers move at the pace of thoughtfulness, measuring passages with tape and light, noting heights and directions, making sketches that later become maps. They record the signature of every side passage and crawl, each odd stone, every drip line. But you can imagine that at night they remember more the rhythm of steps and the steady comfort of the cave's cool air. Their work helps water managers understand the shape of aquifers. It aids biologists in protecting species that live nowhere else. Their maps sometimes connect with other maps, a pleasurable moment of tidy edges aligning, like two puzzle pieces that find each other after sitting alone. The interplay of dissolution and deposition is not always a simple cycle. Slight changes in cave ventilation alter carbon dioxide in the air, tilting the balance. During cold months, denser air can sink in through openings, lowering carbon dioxide levels and enhancing calcite deposition in some areas. In warm months, air can flow outward in the opposite way, raising the balance slightly and slowing growth. The cave breathes with the seasons, and formations listen in subtle shifts. You can imagine a slow curve drawn across a page representing these changes, not sharp, not jagged, just a gentle wave over years. Karst landscapes reflect ancient and recent climates, sometimes at once. Fossil stalagmites sit on old floors, broken and left in place, their growth rings paused by a change that became permanent long ago. New ones grow near them, slim and bright. In some caves, remnants of pale ice crystals trapped inside calcite speak of colder times when permafrost sealed the surface. In others, the presence of a thick layer of clay under a stalagmite reveals an episode when the cave flooded more often, carrying fine particles inward from soils outside. Each clue is a thread in a tapestry, viewed best in a warm, slow light. Language shape mirrors geology here. Words like Dolin, Uvala, and Polje come from places where these forms are common, carrying the cultural stamp of the people who named them. Vauclusion springs take their name from a French valley. Ponor, for swallow hole, also carries a story of travel from one tongue to another. The language of Karst is a map of attention. People know what they live with and give it names. You can think of a local shepherd pointing out a depression with a slow wave of a hand, saying a word that fits it perfectly, a word thick with family memory. That connection folds people into the landscape, and the landscape into them. The soundscape of Karst is soothing. Stand at a spring and listen to water fretting gently over a rocky lip, a sound like pages of a book turned by a breeze. Enter a cave, and the world quiets, the steps of your own shoes muted by dampness and sediment. Little sounds matter. A drop falls. A series of 3 drops from different places gives a rhythm. Far off, a trickle merges into a hiss that softens your thoughts. In periods after rain, water can roll across limestone ledges inside, adding a low chord. When it dries down again, you return to the simpler highs of drips and faint air movement. If you turn off your light in imagination, the sound feels like a blanket, and your mind draws smooth lines through the dark. The surfaces of rocks tell tales patiently. Polished marble-like walls hold signs of previous water levels in wavy marks that catch light in certain angles like fingerprints. In places where condensation corrosion occurs, water condenses on ceilings and walls and dissolves a film of calcite, smoothing surfaces quietly. Where minerals other than calcite colour the stone, sometimes iron brings warm brown and red tones. Manganese adds a gentle grey, and copper leaves a green whisper in thin films. None of it shouts. It is all subtle and therefore calming. You may think of the hydrological balance across seasons, and how karst aquifers buffer the extremes. During heavy rains, they soak up pulses, filling conduits and little storages in the epikarst, then releasing water into springs days later, keeping surface streams flowing while skies clear. During dry spells, stored water maintains a modest discharge, offering trout a place to linger and farmers a dependable supply. This is one reason why communities near karst rely on springs, some for centuries, building stone basins and washhouses where people gather to talk, to rinse fabrics, to pause. The spring becomes a civic hearth made of water, a shared slow metronome under everyday life. Elsewhere, lava once flowed and left tunnels when the molten rock drained away, a different kind of cave, with a past that was fiery rather than wet. These lava tubes are not karst, yet they share the sense of a hidden corridor, and they sometimes hold ice or rare roots hanging like curtains from ceilings, absorbing moisture from the cave air. While the processes are different, the feeling of stillness is similar, and it makes the broader picture of underground spaces richer and more gentle. If your mind drifts toward questions about stability and change, let it drift softly. Karst terrains are responsive, yes, and for people building or living on them, this leads to careful choices and quiet monitoring. Small depressions can appear over time as voids near the surface grow, and these events invite consideration rather than worry. The lesson is the same kind of awareness you already hold while traversing a forest path where roots might rise from the soil. Step lightly, respect the ground, and the ground will hold you well. Communities adopt mapping and maintenance as routine habits. This is house care at the scale of the land. When tracing water in karst, scientists sometimes release a harmless dye at a sink point and observe springs downstream. The color appears with a delay that speaks volumes. It emerges faintly at one spring and stronger at another, telling the tale of two pathways. It arrives once, then again after a storm, revealing that some water temporarily stored in the epikarst returns later. This method is gentle, and it provides knowledge that protects wells and springs. walls resting together. Dust lies evenly across them, and a single thread of flowstone cements a few lightly into a group. Beyond, a crawlway opens into a larger room, and a stalagmite stands at its centre, weighted to the floor by centuries of drops. If you wait long enough, a drop falls from the stalactite above and adds a ring imperceptibly. Repetition does the work here. The gentle rhythm continues even while we sleep. Earth continues this sculpting. Tiny layers build through the night. Overnight changes too small to see, but certain to accumulate. Your own breathing matches an easy cadence, in and out, like water leaving and entering the rock through the seasons. There is comfort in that parallel. The world tends to patterns you can feel but cannot always name. Cast landscapes simply give them form that lasts long enough for us to notice. On the surface, weathered limestone outcrops can form grikes and clints, the blocks separated by fissures widened by water. Moss and small ferns find shelter in the cool shade of these cracks, and snails ease across their edges with unhurried certainty. Walking across such a pavement invites slow steps. The ground asks for attention, and you give it willingly, each foot placed like a calm thought. Around you, shrubs stand low, shaped by wind and seasons, and birds pass overhead at a measured pace. It is a plateau that encourages long, quiet walks and simple picnics, a place where a blanket spreads and a book opens but is not read quickly. Below sea cliffs, you might find sea caves in limestone, eroded by waves, which are not cast in origin, but still speak of stone that yields to a steady force. Over time, those sea caves can connect to cast conduits and make windows that flush salt and fresh water in gently alternating patterns. In ancient times, when the sea was lower, water cut new rooms that now sit drowned as time brought the sea back in. Divers move through these spaces carefully, lights revealing shimmering haloclines where fresh and salt water meet, blurring the view like heat on a road. Silvery filaments of bacteria hang in places where sulfur compounds emerge, a delicate, living curtain responding to chemistry. In certain caves, where dolomite plays a role, magnesium in the rock encourages a different texture in the formations. Surfaces are sometimes rougher, more granular, where aragonite forms instead of calcite. Needles appear, or fans, their angles precise yet light. In other areas, iron-rich waters leave ochre stains that trace the path of flows along walls, turning white formations into soft ochre tapestries. None of this is loud. It is decoration placed by time, ornaments selected without impatience. At the far end of an imaginary cave, you think of how an exploration party reaches a sump, a pool that marks where the passage continues underwater. There is a pause. The surface of the water is placid, a mirror to stalactites above. Divers prepare in slow movements, check another chamber, calm exhalations popping gently at the surface, and once more dry ground invites footsteps. This is how exploration proceeds, step by gentle step, breath by measured breath. Outside, the land above these caves might hold a farm. A farmer's day begins before full light, dew beading on grass. The field slopes toward a sink that has in the past accepted surface water from heavy storms. The farmer knows this and plants accordingly, avoiding deep-rooted crops near that spot, letting grasses dominate, which love the shallow, rich soil. A hedgerow marks the boundary of a polder that floods in fall, the water sitting like a shallow lake until the conduits beneath accept as much as they can at their own speed. Meanwhile, swallows skim the surface of that temporary lake, taking small insects. It is a system that works when given space. The farmer's grandparent knew it, and so does the farmer's grandchild. The present is a layer in the same calm cycle. In cities with karst, planners understand that storm water needs a gentle route into the ground without carrying contaminants. They may use grassy swales, small basins, and filters before water reaches sinkholes. They may limit certain activities near naturals, sinks and springs, not as an imposition, but as a kindness to the aquifer that gives the city its drinking water. Teaching children about where their water comes from remains a satisfying task. They stand at a spring and see the water sliding out of the earth, and the idea lands with surprising clarity. Groundwater is not a lake under the grass. It is movement through spaces and along channels too small for eyes, and sometimes large enough for a person to walk. Knowing that nurtures gentle habits, the gentle rhythm continues. In caves with long histories, crystalline records of ancient weather sit a few centimeters away from present air. Researchers measure the growth rings of stalagmites, a task that involves careful sampling and quiet time in labs. The ratio of isotopes in oxygen records temperature and precipitation patterns. Trace elements say more about dust in the air, about vegetation on the surface. The result is a graph of grace, a line that wiggles with ancient rains and dry spells, long gone. When revealed, these lines do not surprise. They confirm that the world breathes in decades and centuries, just as people breathe in seconds and minutes. Harmony across scales can be profoundly reassuring. You might envision places where human art meets karst in an even more explicit way. Carved cave temples, niches, and chambers along limestone cliffs hold statues and inscriptions, their surfaces smoothed by time, the corners softened by the same processes that shape stalactites. Moss gathers on the edges, and incense once curled in air now clear and quiet. The stone held both water and human patience. It still does. Travelers pause there not for spectacle, but for a steady feeling that endures. Have you drifted to the midpoint of our slow journey and found a corner of curiosity opening in your mind? What topic should we cover next? Now we breathe back in, further into the many faces of these landscapes. There is the matter of scale in the system gushers hold water in ways that delay and extend its travel. These small storages soften the hydrograph, the graph of water flow, at springs, smoothing the spikes. Larger conduits respond more directly, passing along pulses from storms with only a little rounding. Scientists often describe karst aquifers as dual porosity or triple porosity, which simply means there are several different types of spaces storing and moving water, each with its rate. You can imagine 3 clocks ticking together. One ticks every hour, one every day, and one every season. The melody of their combination produces a living spring that speaks of rain that fell yesterday, last week, and last month altogether. In some mountain karst, caves open high on slopes, and cold air flows downward in summer, creating microclimates where alpine plants find a niche lower than they might otherwise. In winter, heavy cold air pools in dolines at night, creating frost pockets that shape vegetation in fine patterns. These details are small but satisfyingly orderly. Ecologists walk transects across them, noting species with measured steps, and the pattern emerges in their notebooks, a quilt stitched together by temperature and dew. The story of karst is patient, but it also responds to the modern world. Pumping from wells lowers local water tables, and springs respond by lessening their flow, quietly at first, noticeably if the pumping continues. When pumping pauses, the aquifer fills again, and the springs recover with the same gentleness with which they receded. This is not a drama, but a conversation between human use and the aquifer's capacity. Good management keeps the exchange calm and sustainable. Where land use changes add more impervious surfaces, runoff speeds up, and some systems experience sharper pulses. Green spaces, permeable pavements, and stormwater features slow those pulses again, reminding us that design can reintroduce calm into the urban water cycle. The gentle rhythm continues. In coastal karst, density differences between fresh and salt water create a delicate lens. Fresh water floats above salt water in the aquifer, held up like a small raft by its lower density. When pumping changes the balance, or when recharge shifts, the surface between fresh and salt water moves, and springs at the coast whisper the change long before a person might notice it elsewhere. Monitoring wells follow it too, with lines that undulate softly. The climate's slow march alters sea level, and these changes leave their script on the cave walls. As sea level rises, freshwater lenses change shape, and springs find new paths. As sea level falls, old caves that were filled with water drain and become new galleries for bats and people. Nothing is sudden here in geological terms. It is all a continuation of the same patient negotiation. Under cities, karst can form hidden windows. Construction sometimes reveals cavities, and builders adjust their designs to accommodate the space, filling and reinforcing with careful engineering. The process is light-handed. The goal is to blend. Over decades, a city learns its underground gradually, just as a person learns a house over seasons, discovering itself in places, not to erase, but to quiet, where water evaporates more than it condenses, such as near cave entries in arid climates. Salt crystals can grow, delicate and ephemeral. They respond to days rather than to decades, and so they feel fleeting, yet they still belong to the same family of slow processes. They are slower than a candle's flame, faster than a stalactite, placed as a gentle mid-tempo in the orchestra of the cave. A visitor notices them one season and finds them different the next. This variability provides the same kind of calm interest you might find in watching clouds. Outside, karst pavements host small pools after rains, and fairy shrimp and other crustaceans hatch from resting eggs, completing their lives in the span of a few days before the pools dry. In this way, karst supports brief bursts of life within the larger framework of slowness. The landing of a dragonfly on the surface of a puddle in a grike becomes the kind of image that anchors a memory. Then the sun returns, the water retreats into joints, and the pavement resumes its quiet. The boundaries between karst and non-karst landscapes can be subtle. A stream flows across sandstone, brown from tannins, then reaches a limestone patch and clarifies, cutting into it and testing for entry points. It might lower its bed until it finds a jar of fractures, then vanish, leaving a dry reach downstream that returns to life, where a spring reintroduces flow. People who study these networks spend calm afternoons following stream beds and looking for signs, carrying small vials, maps, and perhaps a thermistor to check temperature changes that signal spring influence. Their work resembles detective stories in a way, except the revelations are planned by nature and discovered by patience rather than by sudden twists. Sometimes the word karst inspires images of hazards. It helps to place those images gently. The ground above a cavity can barely change for centuries, then subside modestly as the underside slowly rearranges. When that happens near people, it becomes a maintenance task, much like managing a cracked wall in a house. Filling, reinforcing, and slowing the processes behind it are all within our capacity. Most of the time, the land's changes are unnoticed by those walking above, and when they are noticed, the response is thoughtful, supported by maps and experience. Calm knowledge is the partner of calm ground. At night, thinking about water moving through rock creates a pleasing sense of order. It moves along the path of least resistance, which changes slowly depending on how the rock dissolves and how sediments arrive. A rock bed with a slight tilt allows water to prefer down-dip directions. Joints oriented at two angles create a grid for water to choose among. The value of a joint increases as water uses it, this positive feedback forming a network of efficient routes. Once a conduit establishes itself, it becomes the main river of the system, collecting smaller flows. The result is a drainage network under the ground, similar in structure to the ones on the surface, just born of a softer force. If you hold this thought gently, it can lull your mind into accepting that many systems in life self-organize in similar ways, in patterns of branching and collecting, in negotiations between constraint edges hold ancient bones of animals that wandered too close and slipped long ago, their presence respected and left undisturbed by researchers who treat these environments with care. The shaft's depth is measured with a rope descending a measured length, a number recorded, a simple satisfying data point that slides into the larger understanding of the cave's form. Far from any town, in a karst field that appears on maps as a blank, a small resurgence sends a modest stream out from under a low limestone ledge. Its flow is never loud. It wets a patch of rocks, feeds a bed of watercress, and turns a small mill wheel in older times. Downstream, it joins a larger river and vanishes into the sound of its flow. The resurgence's pool hosts fish that use it as a nursery, and kingfishers visit with wings that flash. A person sitting on the bank reads for a while, and then simply listens, book resting on a knee, enjoying the trust the spring offers. In another region, a polje holds a village. Houses sit on slightly raised ground. The fields fill with water in late winter and spring, and the roads follow the higher rims, designed by habit rather than by strict plan. The people plant when they can, and fish when the water comes. They drain nothing, because the rhythm is part of the place's identity. Children learn the pattern as part of the calendar, and look forward to the shallow lakes for the birds that come, and for the way the world reflects in those calm surfaces. The place is a demonstration of living with water as a seasonal guest, rather than forcing it to leave. Karst enters language through metaphor too. People talk about hidden rivers when they talk about thoughts. They mention sinkholes when they speak of sudden confusions or of issues that seem to swallow attention. But in the land's own version, these are simply parts of a calm system. A sinkhole is a portal of exchange, a point where surface meets subsurface. An underground river is not rogue, but devoted, doing its work elegantly. If you hold those meanings while you think about your day, the metaphors smooth themselves. Problems become passages, thoughts become flows. You find your way toward a spring, a gentle outflow where the thought returns to the open air, clarified. Inside caves, the presence of carbon dioxide in air is often slightly higher than outside because of the respiration of soil and visitors, and because of degassing. Ventilation comes from temperature differences and barometric changes. When the outside air becomes heavier, it sinks into cave mouths and displaces lighter air. When outside air becomes lighter, cave air can sigh outward. These small movements refresh the space and carry a soft continuity. Bats benefit by finding stable yet breathable air. People feel it as a faint current across skin, cooler than the body, soothing in its way. In some caves, broken speleothems lie on the floor where earthquakes once nudged them. The pattern of these breaks tells scientists about past seismic events, and yet even here, the story is one of endurance. New formations grow around the edges where the breaks occurred, healing the scenery in slow time. The cave folds such outsiders. They find dampness by smell and by the faint cool that rises from certain spots at dusk. They know where not to place a heavy load, where to move livestock after long rains, where to seed grasses that can thrive. The knowledge passes quietly between generations, a line of practical wisdom that fits the pace of the land. The gentle rhythm continues. At dawn, a cenote's surface can be flat as glass, reflecting the first colours of the sky in a circle framed by limestone. Roots descend from trees above, seeking water patiently, hanging like draperies that touch the surface lightly. Fish circle below, and the opening acts like a skylight for the cave system beneath. Divers here swim into deeper rooms where stalactites formed long ago when sea level sat lower, now submerged in clear, quiet layers. The water's clarity makes distance deceptive. A stalagmite 20 meters away appears close enough to touch. Slowly you feel your sense of scale adjust to the calm. The diver's surface after time, spent in carefully planned profiles, their voices hushed in respect for the echoing bowl of the cenote. There is also the phenomenon of sinkhole ponds, where a depression fills with rain and groundwater and becomes a circular lake. Some of these are deep, and the water settles into layers of different ages, storing the history of pollen and ash and subtle changes in the watershed. A core extracted from the soft bottom shows the layers like thin pages in a thick book, each representing a season or a year. The reading of that book happens in labs with soft equipment and quiet concentration. The conclusions travel out into the world calmly, informing land managers and teachers, giving communities a sense of how their place has changed and how it might continue to. As the night grows quieter where you are, consider how karst emphasizes the long view. The processes you can name are not separate. They are one fabric, with dissolution here, deposition there, flow here, stillness there. Caves do not end. They connect. Rivers do not stop. They go under to rest and return elsewhere. Sprays of calcite that look like fragile ornaments are as permanent in their context as mountain peaks, because permanence is relative. Everything is a matter of rate. If you listen, you hear a world made of rates that vary by many orders of magnitude. Your breath is fast in this scale. Your thoughts are faster, yet nothing conflicts. It all fits within a net that is large enough to hold both stalactites that take centuries to grow a finger's length, and a moth that lives for a night near the entrance. You might walk again, this time along a trail that skirts a line of sinkholes at the edge of a forest. It is late, and the light is gentle. A stone wall built long ago marks a boundary that still matters. The wall dips slightly near each depression, allowing leaves to collect. Beyond, a field shines with dew. The path feels even underfoot, a product of many footsteps choosing the best line. Nearby, a small sign explains that during heavy rains, the area may hold shallow water for a few days, and that this is normal and welcome. The sign's tone is calm and descriptive, scenes trains your eyes to accept less, to find beauty in the minimal. The guide speaks gently about how stalactites and stalagmites grow, how broken features should be left alone because they cannot be reattached by ordinary means, how touching formations leaves oils that can prevent deposition. The group moves at an easy pace, and in the coolest room there is a pause. The guide switches off the light for a moment to let true darkness sit in the room. Even if someone's phone blinks, the overall effect is a stillness that reaches into the body. The breath slows. The group accepts quiet, perhaps in a new way. Cave surveying requires an attention that many find restful. One person holds a notebook, another a compass, another a tape or laser distance tool. They measure leg by leg, noting the slope, the bearing, the distance. They describe the shape at each station, where the passage widens, where floor rises. This is field work that values consistency over speed. Later, at home or in a lab, those notes become lines and polygons. The map emerges with its arches and loops. Small errors are smoothed. The result might look like a vine across a page. Annotations add depth. Places where water enters or exits, where bat colonies roost, where sensitive formations occur. The map is a picture of habitability. It tells rescue teams where a person could go in an emergency, and it tells scientists where to look when rains change something. It is practical and beautiful. If you think about scaling from micro to macro, the chemistry at a grain boundary flows upward to shape entire valleys. At the smallest scale, carbonic acid meets calcite and persuades a few ions to join the water. At the scale of millimeters, microcracks widen. At centimeters, we see fractures enlarge. At meters, we map conduits. At kilometers, we outline basins. At tens of kilometers, we draw boundaries around karst plateaus. This nested structure is a pleasing thought, the kind of structure that appears in other parts of life too. Behavior creates habits. Habits shape days. Days accumulate into seasons. Seasons make years. The principle repeats, and repetition comforts. There are places where underground rivers emerge with a temperature slightly warmer than the air, creating mist that drifts low over the water. Walking alongside, you might feel it on your hands, a faint caress warmer than the night. In winter, such springs resist freezing, providing open water for birds and animals. In summer, they cool the immediate area, hinting at caves behind. The spring's name might be written on a stone marker, perhaps the same stone for generations, with letters softened by lichen. The spring's pool gathers coins, tossed by visitors who find the habit harmless and wishful, and a gentle sign suggests letting the water remain free of such metal, so that all can enjoy its clarity. Stored coins are collected later by caretakers and offered to community projects, converting small wishes into small realities. As you think of water rising through generally, but still sensitive to conditions. Once formed, these structures persist with a determination that looks like stillness. Their surfaces collect a film of moisture on damp nights, reflecting light in a softened way that soothes the eyes. Returning above ground, karst plants behave in ways that suit intermittent water supply. Some sinkhole rims host orchids that prefer the microclimate, receiving cool drafts and steady humidity. Others hold pines or junipers adapted to shallow soils. In the meadows beyond, grasses dominate because their roots exploit the epikarst's quick-draining layers, finding pockets of moisture reliably even when the topsoil appears dry. The result is a resilient, flexible plant community that mirrors the flexibility of the aquifer below. You slip back into the underground, where a cave river has carved a canyon within a cave, walls rising 10 meters above a channel that ripples with gentle confidence. The water's clarity reveals small pebbles on the bed arranged in thin bars, themselves shaped by speeds that often hold steady. Every now and then, a small fish hovers in a nook, facing upstream. Above, high on the walls, scallops catch the light, and lines of calcite hang like threads, a thin skin of flowstone that met the level of a past flood and then stopped there. The ceiling carries a faint stripe of smoke from early human torches, a reminder of visits from long ago, preserved by air that rarely flows strongly enough to erase it. Caves sometimes form beneath glacial landscapes when meltwater disappears into crevasses and finds carbonate bedrock beneath. Here, the water can be colder, the dissolution slower, but the sheer volume during warm days can be significant. When the glacier recedes, caves remain, their entrances blocked by till in some places, open in others. These caves present two sets of memories, written first by ice and then by water. Finding such a cave feels like discovering a footnote written by the earth, clarifying a chapter above. In settings where karst is mantled by thick soils, the underground is less likely to speak directly. There are fewer sinkholes, fewer obvious signs, yet the water moves in the same way, and springs still deliver steady flows to rivers. In this case, the karst is shy rather than absent. Knowing it is there makes the land feel deeper. Fields are rows on a page that has chapters below, beyond easy reach, but present all the same. Long cave systems complicate the idea of up and down. They follow the contours of the water table, sometimes rising gradually for kilometers. A passage might flow upward as you walk, your legs telling you gently the truth of the slope, even as the river's direction suggests a subtle trick. Topography underground is a different friend, sometimes counterintuitive, and therefore more interesting in the calmest way. It asks you to accept that a map can hold vertical and horizontal clues that your eyes do not readily grasp. This acceptance is itself restful, a small letting go of the usual. Imagine again, now, the soil. Its structure is a galaxy for water. There are pores big enough for drops and pores small enough for the thinnest films. Roots shape these spaces, ants engineer them. Fungi Even your steps help, pressing the surface just enough to reposition grains and to guide microflows, not in ways you control, but in ways you harmonize with. As we near the gentle close of this journey, picture again the meadow at the beginning. The surface remains calm, humble. A few wild flowers lean softly. The sun has fallen, and the sky holds the faintest glow on its western edge. The river underfoot continues, unaware of all but gravity and mineral balance. It sets its own tempo and keeps it in rain and in drought, in frost and in heat. Where it meets air, it leaves a trace, and where it leaves air, it takes a message into stone. The result is a countryside marked by bowls and hills, by springs and quiet sinkholes, by streams that go missing for a while and return around a bend. A closing thought arrives like a small spring emerging from a shadow. Karst is patience you can walk on. The ground holds in it a social agreement between water and rock. There is no conflict here. There is only persistence. The hidden networks under your feet are not secrets in a troubling sense. They are private rooms the earth keeps tidy, opening their doors when the time is right, when an opening appears, when a person arrives with a soft light and a quiet step. At that moment, the cave welcomes presence with cool air and steady rhythms. You, standing at the threshold, breathe in the scent of mineral and time. You let your shoulders lower and your gaze soften. You let the underground become a frame of mind, useful now for rest. The gentle rhythm continues. As you settle into sleep, feel the same slow flow in your chest. Imagine droplets gathering on the edges of your thoughts and releasing them one by one to pools that hold them safely. The caves and the springs will continue their work while you rest, tracing lines through stone that are the shape of patience. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me tonight. If this slow journey helped you relax, a soft like and a gentle subscribe help us release more of these calm explorations. And if you want to keep learning while drifting off, the playlist in the description can play on softly. You are safe, you are cozy, the earth turns steadily, and the rivers underfoot keep their watch while you sleep.